Okay, so hi everyone. My name's Alex Klug. I'm the Assistant Director of Hall Hunger Initiative today with our Director Mark Willis, and just want to say thank you. We're really excited to be here presenting with you all. So before we get started, I'm going to do a really brief introduction on who we are and what we're doing today before passing it off to Mark. So who is Hall Hunger Initiative? We were founded by Ambassador Tony Hall, a longtime supporter of the Alliance to End Hunger. Ambassador Hall was a previous congressman here in our region in Ohio and a UN ambassador to the Food and Agricultural Organization. So he saw all around the world, some of the most serious cases of global poverty and hunger. And then when he came back home, he noticed that the Dayton, Ohio region really was, unfortunately, one of the leaders in the. So he brought a lot of his teachings, his global perspective back home here. So again, we are an advocacy-based organization here in Ohio, and we focus on convening community partners to build a just and sustainable food system. And we do this with a three-pronged approach. First is leadership and convening, then education and advocacy, and direct community support. So our day-to-day looks like working with regional coalition building, sharing important resources and information like we are with you today, and providing direct support in the community through projects like our Community ID program for immigrants and our microgrant programs. Underlying all of this work, though, is a need to address the root causes of hunger. So today, we're here speaking to you as leaders in your community about a really powerful tool we like to use to advocate and educate around hunger: Bread for the World's Racial Wealth Gap Simulation. A quick shout out to our little team. We do all this work, obviously, alongside Ambassador Hall. I'm obviously here, Mark is obviously here, but we wanted to acknowledge the really hard work of our social media and marketing manager, Sam Trevesky. She couldn't be with us today, but for any of you who subscribe to our newsletter or follow us on Instagram or TikTok, you're already familiar with Sam's amazing work. And then on that note, and Jenna kind of said some of this, we will be able to provide our presentation to everyone. So we were having a little technical difficulty getting started. I'm not sure if those files are available right now, but we certainly can make sure that they will be. So at the end of the presentation, you'll have all of this information, a list of resources and links to go forward with. And with that, I will pass it off to Mark.
Okay, thank you, Alex. So we have this wonderful presentation and exercise from Bread for the World. It's powerful, it makes an impact, it helps people understand in a way deeper than they normally can. So at Hall Hunger Initiative, our challenge, our opportunity is how do we present this in a way that helps people understand our work with the food system. So we have developed a way of presenting it we want to share with you today. And it's in 4 parts. It takes 60 to 90 minutes, depending on how much we put in, how much time the group has. We begin with a little introduction about who we are, like Alex just did. And we talk a little bit about why we present this topic, why an anti-hunger group is talking about race. Then we have about 30 minutes for the actual Bread for the World simulation. After the discussion, we bring everybody back and we talk about some local information. What we want to do is reinforce what Bread for the World has in their exercise. And then we conclude with next steps, some resources, and evaluation. So we begin by talking about why this is important. Why is an anti-hunger group dealing with race? This is an opportunity for us to show connections, and the connections I'm sure everyone out there is aware of. But for us, everyone in the community understands this. Hall Hunger Initiative has as our goal, as many of you do, to create a just and sustainable food system. And to do that, we have to deal with the root causes of hunger. We know that when Ambassador Hall worked in other countries, that he was dealing with hunger caused by civil war, refugee crisis, drought, even insects. But in America, hunger has one cause, and that's poverty. And so the major cause, or a major cause of poverty in America, is structural racism. We can't address the root causes of hunger unless we confront racism in our community. So that's our connection, and we want to make sure that the group we're presenting to understands this clearly. We begin too, we want to have a little discussion before we get to the exercise. This can be a scary topic for people, so we want to break them in a little gently. So we talk about equality, and we ask someone from the group, tell me what equality means to you. And they will talk about being equal under the law, equal rights, equal opportunity. And it's such an American ideal, right? Equality. But then we want them to look at things broader, because equality isn't looking at people where they are. Everybody is the same under equality, but we really want to talk about equity. So we asked the group to define equity and talk about the differences. And this is also a way to get them just discussing something that's a little easier than some of the racial topics. And then we also show this last slide about reality, and we really want to reinforce that there's some growing gaps in America. The other thing that's important about this exercise is its racial wealth gap. We're talking about wealth, not income. So we want to spend just a moment talking about the difference between wealth and income. This slide is perfect illustration, but wealth is basically generational. It's not just what you've done, it's what your parents have done and what your grandparents have done. And that may mean you inherited a house or some money. Income is what you get every week or every year. So we want to make that distinction. And then we do this slide again to show how it relates to hunger. This is the last slide before we do the exercise. That without wealth, you're more likely to become poor. When you're poor, you're more likely to experience hunger. So we make this connection for them. What I want to do now is show a short video about how Bread for the World exercise works. Alex, did you want to say something first?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Okay, so yeah, as Mark said, before we get started with this video, probably recognize some familiar faces here. We really want to address something that's pretty important to acknowledge. And, I can't see now, but I'm sure we have a fairly diverse group. We're made up, from a national audience. And one of the really important for us to kind of go over as facilitators here is acknowledging that each person has their own experiences around race, wealth, and poverty. Some people talk openly about these topics while a lot of others do not. Some people have had really good experiences living and discussing these realities while others have not. And, the reality I think in America today is that these are difficult conversations for a lot of people to have. And when something's difficult, we avoid doing it. But, as leaders in our spaces, as people who are tackling these really, really huge systemic issues, we have to be able to talk about it. To really address poverty and hunger, we have to be able to talk about race. So the simulation is a really beautiful tool because it separates that personal experience from factual policy. So by explaining how our federal government created and enforced policies that benefited some while harming, the simulation provides each audience fact-based information regarding the history of these policies. So what HHI does is, as Mark's already said, we go in and customize this information. We start with a presentation, end with a presentation, and we encourage you to do the same. So tie in regionally factual, non-biased information to allow this information to be seen through the lens of your community today. So again, while this is an objective learning experience, it still will be emotional. For both the audience and admittedly for us as facilitators. The first time I've done this, it's uncomfortable sometimes and I can just say from my personal experience. So throughout the process, it's really important to remember that your audience may be made up of professionals in a workplace, students in a classroom, and we won't know the nature of those interpersonal relationships. So ensuring that each person feels comfortable and safe in the room is really important. And, we certainly want to remember that we need to be flexible, allow people to leave the room if they need to. We never require somebody participates in a discussion if they feel uncomfortable doing so. We certainly want to encourage participation, but we should never call on someone and force them to talk about something. So again, this is really necessary information for us all to have, but to do it in a safe way is so important. So as leaders, we don't want to do it in a way that welcomes people, or we want to do it in a way that welcomes people into the space and not push way. So just being really mindful of that as we start these exercises is very important. So with that, I think if we're ready, Mark, we can go ahead and see the process in action.
How was it designed? All 13 policies were selected intentionally. These policies had some of the most influential impacts on creating what we now know to be the racial hunger, income, and wealth divides we see today. We have more on this on the frequently asked questions section of the guide. How to prepare. In the guide, we actually provide a section that will allow facilitators to think more inwardly and reflect on things like privilege, race, and how the group might perceive them. We also provide tips on how to discuss race effectively in different group settings. After this, facilitators should go through the checklist, and then you're pretty much ready to go. Facilitating the simulation. Arrive 30 minutes before the simulation to set up. This process is much easier if each set is in its own folder. And don't forget your backup copy of the PowerPoint presentation, but only if you plan to use one, along with your timer. Allow for 10 minutes for the introduction, 25 to 30 minutes for the simulation, and 20 to 30 minutes for the large group discussion and next steps, or longer if you prefer. We've provided easy talking points in the PowerPoint, which is linked below. To do the simulation, participants should be seated in groups of 4 to 8 people, and draw from an envelope to select a race card. Half of the participants will receive Black participant race cards, and the other half will receive white participant race cards. Starting with the participant with a white race card, have him or her read the policy card aloud, followed by the associated action. Remember, in each round, participants will either lose or gain a series of money, land, and opportunity lost cards. Set your timer for 25 to 30 minutes. During this time, we encourage you to walk around, listen to the groups, and answer questions that they might have. Give a time check at the halfway mark, and again with 5 minutes remaining, so groups can pace themselves. And at the end, participants should count how many cards they have. Facilitating the large group discussion. You want to remember to start the group discussion with our standard question. How many money cards did everyone end up with?
So how many money cards did you all end up with?
How many money cards did everyone end up with?
People with white participant race cards should have 13 money cards.
13?
While
And
the
your
other half
white
of participants with black race cards should have 1 money card.
1 money card?
And the
Okay, hope that video was helpful. This is what I want to walk through some of the details with you. So we have a packet with the information that they were showing you there. And what we do is we put the packet on the desk or the table before the presentation. We ask them, don't open the envelope until it's time. So inside this packet is an instruction sheet, 13 policy cards, a debrief card. The debrief card has some questions on the back. What happens often is one group will get done before the other, so we have them working on these debrief cards. Then they've got money cards, lost opportunity cards, land cards, and then race cards. And the race cards will be black or white participants. What we do this a little different than Bread for the World. We ask people, if you're someone white participating, we ask you to participate as a black participant. And if you're black, we ask you to be a white participant for this. And that makes the experience more powerful for folks. Okay, so we go through, they're in those small groups, they have their packet, they've got their materials laid out. We do one policy as a group, and then we have them read them on their own as a small group. So I'm going to let Alex be one of the members of the group and read policy card number 3. With it, there's both information and an action. Alex? This
Thank
one?
you. Perfect, thanks.
Mhm.
Okay, so policy number 3, the National Housing Act of 1934, Part 1. Policies under this law guaranteed federally backed loans to whites and legally refused loans to blacks and anyone else who chose to live in or near black neighborhoods. This practice, known as redlining, targeted entire black neighborhoods and identified them as Grade D. This made it nearly impossible for appraisers in the private sector to do business in black neighborhoods because all of the residents were considered bad credit risks. So our action for this card, as a white participant, would be to pick up 1 land card and 1 money card for the equity gained in purchasing homes not near black neighborhoods. Equity increased a family's ability to save for future needs. For our black participants, we don't pick up any land cards because of the inability to purchase homes. They also do not pick up any money cards since it was illegal to lend to blacks, preventing them from building equity and weakening their ability to save for future needs.
Okay, so we take a moment and each member of the group goes through and does the action. I'm going to ask Alex to read one more policy card.
Okay.
Normally, different folks in the group, we ask them to take turns reading.
Okay, policy number 12, employment discrimination. Although racial discrimination in the workforce was legally abolished in 1964 with the Civil Rights Act, racial discrimination continues among all educational levels and job sectors. For example, blacks are likely not to be called back after they complete job applications for interviews. In addition, the gap between the hourly pay of blacks and whites has grown from $3.55 an hour in 1979 to $6.73 an hour in 2016. Our action here: for white participants, pick up 2 money cards for being twice as likely to receive a callback for a job of $14,000 a year more than your black peers. For black participants, pick up 2 lost opportunity cards for being 2 times less likely to receive a job callback and for earning an average of $14,000 a year less than your white peers. Doing the math shows that racial discrimination in the workforce costs black workers at least $600,000 over the course of their working careers.
Thank you, Alex. You can see how powerful the information is. And as the group walks through those 13 cards, there's a cumulative effect of opportunity lost time after time after time. It goes through about, it's starting with sharecropping in 1860 up to current time. So it's very powerful for the people participating. At the end, this is roughly what their results should be for each. For the black participants, they'll have 1 land card, lost opportunity cards, and 1 money card. A white participant will have 9 land cards, 1 lost opportunity card, and 13 money cards. We want them to spread these out so they can see clearly what the differences are as they're going through this exercise. At this point, we start doing the discussion. They have an opportunity to do both small group discussion and then we discuss as a large group. And we work this a little differently depending on the size of the group that we work with. And we've done this with groups as small as 8 or 9 and as big as 150. So we do it a little different. If we have a small group, then we may just go completely into everybody talks together. Bigger group, we may spend more time in small group discussion. One of the great things that Bread for the World does is prepare questions for both the large group and the small group. And so we let them work with those. I have found that some questions get response a little easier than others. And so I put a couple of the questions that seem to work. Usually this exercise creates a lot of ideas, concerns, feelings. So people are pretty ready to talk. Once in a great while, though, you get a group where people are kind of quiet. While we are walking around during the exercise, you kind of get a feel for the group, who's talkative. So if people aren't really speaking, they're not answering the first question, usually there's somebody in that group who's been talkative, and you can say, hey, I heard you guys talking about this. What do you think? So you have to maybe encourage someone to talk a little bit, but you should have a feel for the groups by this point. One of the questions that always gets response is, how did this make you feel? And especially powerful when white people who are participating as Black people experience loss after loss after loss. It's a powerful experience for them. And we ask them, what did you learn participating as another race? What surprised you the most? Sometimes we do these where everybody's working together. We just did one with a group that many of them were social workers. It's important then for them to think about, how do these policies affect them at work? We don't get a lot of questions about the policies themselves. If we do, I always am happy to refer them back to Bread for the World. At their website, they have detailed information on each one of these policies. So don't feel like you have to be an expert on each one of these. It's also important that we want the discussion to be with the group. We want them talking to each other. Naturally, they may talk to us as facilitators, but if we can throw questions or comments back, well, he just asked about this. What do you guys think about it? You'll get a much richer discussion going on. The other thing is that, we have to be authentic. There are questions I can't answer. Either I don't know, or frankly, some questions aren't appropriate for a white person to answer. And I may throw it back to the group and say, do you guys have experience that can help with this question? After we brought the discussion to a close, we bring everybody back and we start our concluding presentation where we look at some more information. And what we again want to do is reinforce what they've discussed. So we talk about that 13-to-1 wealth gap and how what they found in the simulation is exactly what economists has told us, that there's about a wealth gap between Black and white households of 13-to-1 in America. People will sometimes ask, well, what about low-income white folks? And there are definitely poor white households, no question. But even at this lowest income level, that disparity exists between Black and white households. And it's even actually a wider disparity at those lower income levels. So we show this slide and talk about that for a minute. And then it's important that we talk about the system. One of the things that people are discovering is that this isn't accidental, that this was government intervention that created the gap that we now have. And sometimes people think, well, we just need to change the system. We need a few more laws. And we want people, and sometimes they will come to this conclusion, understand that the system isn't broken. It's working exactly the way it was intended to. This was a system created by white men with land and money that was designed to keep white men with money in power. So it's important that we help folks understand that this is not a system that we tinker with. This is a system that's working the way it was designed to. We would then want to talk about local data. People sometimes look for a safe harbor when they're confronted with difficult information, right? We want to think, this isn't me. This is not going to happen in my community. This is someplace else. We want to make them understand that we're not only talking about redlining in the 30s, that there are still destructive impacts of racism in our community today. And the way we do that is by showing local information. Now, you can do that. Some of the examples we're going to show you in a moment, but you can find other things too. It could be infant mortality statistics. It could be information about education, poverty, hunger. You can find something that's relevant to your community and recent that will help reinforce what's shown in the simulation. It does help if you've got a connection to hunger or a connection to one of the policies. You also want to make sure that you're using data that's really substantiated, like something from the health department, something that people won't debate that they'll understand, okay? And let me show you a couple of examples. So one of the things that we use is life expectancy. It's a very solid and easy to demonstrate statistic, and it's powerful. If you look in Montgomery County, Ohio, where we live, you can see that there's almost a 5-year difference in life expectancy between white and black in our community. That says a lot. And Alex is talking about how this can get emotional, and this is where I will get emotional because I will sometimes talk a little personally. Like, I am a white male, I'm past the age of 65, I've outlived statistically my black counterpart in our community. And that means that I get to see my grandkids not start first grade, but start middle school. I don't just watch my son start college, I'm going to watch him graduate. And for my black counterpart in my community, his grandkids look up at the dance recital or the school play and they see an empty seat. I don't know how you measure that, but it's powerful. You can tell it affects me. And I want people to understand, we see these numbers all the time, and it's so easy to click next. But we need them to understand that these are human lives that we're talking about. It's not just statistics. So while we have a very objective set of data that we're showing people, we need to also reinforce that these are human beings that we're talking about. And the loss is very deep and very personal. Alex?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Okay, so, and I want to keep an eye on our time, so I might go somewhat quickly through these next few slides. This is something that we would typically do to close out our presentation. So again, we've kind of done our intro stage, giving some examples around equity versus equality, getting into the simulation, and then we bring it back to the presentation as Mark did to talk about some of the health statistics and really looking at, what does this look like in our communities today. As Mark said, though, one of the things that we hear a lot is that, people kind of almost want to disconnect from it. That's not me, that's not my family, that's not my community. So one of the things that we found that works really well as a resource that kind of regionalizes and localizes this for us is looking at redlining cards. At this point in the presentation, everyone would have gone through the simulation, so they're familiar with the concept of redlining if they weren't already. And we chose this information for 2 reasons. So because of that reason, it's one of the policies presented in the simulation, and because we can correlate the history to our community today. So before we present these slides, we do like to give a trigger warning because the language in these cards is so blatantly racist. So we do say this, though, because we feel it's necessary for people to actually hear, and people need to understand how commonplace it was for our government officials to use dehumanizing language not that long ago and in our own neighborhoods. So this first card we're looking at is a redlining card from one of our more affluent communities. It's called Oakwood. In this card, we note that the grade of the neighborhood is A. And then we can run through some of the language on here. So again, what we've taken is, we've taken these images and we've actually highlighted, put circles, arrows. We really want to point out specific things to the audience here. So one of the things we're noting is it's in a restricted neighborhood, meaning properties can't be bought or sold by people of color. And down here at the bottom, we can see what's essentially a ranking system. So no foreign-born residents, the average income is $2,500, and there was 0 infiltration. And just really think about that word for a second. When we think about infiltration, it doesn't have a very positive connotation, but it was something that the government felt comfortable using, was saying 0 infiltration of a type of person. Okay, and then our next card. Thank you. The next card we're showing you is from Dayton's, one of Dayton's historically underserved neighborhood. It's called Old North Dayton. Today, this region is one of the largest immigrant communities that we have, and we can see in this card that history extends back past the 1930s. So here what we're pointing out is this community is a grade D, and although there are favorable influences here, such as schools and transportation, the type of people who live here are what give it such a low grade. So the community is made up of low-class foreigners and Negroes. Okay, the families here only make $900, which is less than half of what their white counterparts in Oakwood made. And at this point in the simulation, we already know that residents couldn't repair their houses because they couldn't get loans from the bank. So in the card notes, houses in disrepair, we know now why that occurred. The card also shows that the government felt comfortable calculating the percentage of people of color in a neighborhood. And while this card only shows 10%, we still use it to show the way neighborhoods were graded and how this grows into either generational wealth or generational poverty. Okay, and then our next slide, please, of our maps. Okay, so again, now what we're doing is we're taking those historical cards, those redlining cards, and bringing them forward today. So it's really important to be able to make that connection. What this slide is showing us is on the left is a redlining map. So that's actually a map of our region of the greater Dayton area. And then on the right, so that map is from the 1930s, almost 100 years ago. The map on the right is a county-based opportunity map. So the county is gauging opportunity based off health, education, transportation. And so what we're doing here again is you can see, I'm not sure how well this translates on the screen today, but on the big screen when we're doing the presentation, you can see really clearly that those redlined areas turned into the lowest opportunity areas, and the green areas turned into the highest opportunity. So again, what we're seeing is, if you grew up in the Dayton area, you can point out and say, oh, that's my neighborhood, and you can see it on the redlining map and start to begin to connect those dots. Okay, and I want to leave us time for questions. So I'm going to kind of go quickly through this. So around this time, we are moving to the end of the presentation, and we really want to talk about modern day discrimination and how it relates to our community being able to access food. The presentation always closes with a slide on immigration because a number of folks who helped put this presentation together were staff in Vistas that Mark had previously worked with, and they were either the children of immigrants or immigrants themselves. And they, again, they said how important it was to have this information brought into those communities as well. So I always want to highlight the modern day realities for our community members. And like many of you, I'm sure, discrimination towards immigrants is a very big concern right now and is impacting their ability to access food. So about there is where we wrap it up, and then we share two last pieces of information for everyone. So we ask each audience member to fill out a very brief evaluation form. And we've taken a few screenshots of those here for you today. This evaluation form is really helpful for us. It's also really helpful for them, we found out, because for us, we obviously get feedback and suggestions, what information do you want here? There is a lot around mental health. We've received a lot around, indigenous populations and again, immigrants in our communities. But it's also really helpful for the audience member because again, if we think back to the beginning when we're talking about, sharing sensitive information, not everybody feels comfortable speaking up in the group setting. So by providing them with an actual opportunity to kind of release and get some of their thoughts out on a piece of paper before they leave the room, you're really allowing them to kind of just, unpack some of that. And so it's not something that's shared with the group, it's just handed to us directly, but it's a way for them to communicate how that felt for them. And then our last and final piece, both for our audience during the simulation and for you all today, is our list of resources. Again, I can't stress enough that this information can be really difficult for some audience members and for those who want to learn more. So it's really important that the information you provide in your presentation is factual and you can back it up quickly. So if somebody comes up to you, challenge something you say in there, it's a lot easier to kind of diffuse the situation by just saying, well, the county created that and I can provide the link to you. So being able to actually hand people a list of resources as we do. On this slide, you'll see on the right-hand side, that actual piece of paper is one that we both print out and provide a QR code to, so people can click the QR code and go to all those active links or take it home with them on a piece of paper and look it up later. It also includes information on books, resources, videos that Mark and I have found useful as we learn more. And so it's a good way for people who are interested in learning more and sharing this in their workplace or in their community with others. Actually got information for you all today. So those links will take you to our website, the QR codes to our Instagram and social media. And then below that is Bread for the World's Racial Wealth Gap Simulation materials. You can print everything there, and I would really encourage you to begin using this. One of the things that we've talked about is if you're not sure how to do this, maybe in your workplace or in your community right away, try it with a group of friends. try it with just some people that you feel comfortable talking to and just see how it feels, see how the conversations start flowing, and then maybe you can take it out into a more formal setting. And then that last link is, I find it's very important and it's very helpful. It is a link to all of the redlining, not all, excuse me, to a lot of redlining maps. There are about 150 on there. So we really encourage you, if you have time today, click on that link, see if you can find your community and see if you can start to draw some of those parallels yourself back home. And I think with that, we are about wrapped up. We've got just a couple minutes for questions. So Jen, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Okay, great. So if anyone has a question, please submit it to the Q&A tab to the right of the viewing window. Alexandra and Mark, you should be able to see any of the questions that may be coming through on the right-hand side. Feel free to take a few moments to answer that. We do have about 5 minutes left in the session, so if you have any questions, please submit them now. Great, thank you.
And I also want to kind of throw out there to the group for everyone. We were interested to know, this certainly isn't a simulation we created, and we think some of you are already familiar with this. So if you have a moment to type in the chat or just chime in, I'd love to hear from you if you use it, if you have other resources you share, if you have feedback on what works for you or what doesn't, or if you're totally new to this. So thanks.
I will say that Alex and I are very committed to this exercise, to what Bread for the World has created, and localizing it as a core service of our food justice work. We have made a great deal of effort to go out and promote it in the community. We'll go any place, anytime. Once in a while, groups will offer to pay us, and that's fine, but we don't require it. That this is something that we see as a core service in the food justice work.
Absolutely. I do see, actually, I think one of our facilitators put something in our backstage chat. Is there a good place to look for data for the Mississippi Delta region in regards to race, wealth gaps, and food insecurity in that community? I can't speak to the Mississippi Delta region in particular. I do know one of the things we pull in, though, is to kind of broaden this. Again, we customize it to different groups, is the concept of environmental justice. It's really important for us to be able to draw those parallels between different sectors. And I bring this up to this question in particular because that region, kind of what's considered an environmental justice hotspot. Different parts of the South in these areas have experienced significant discrimination as far as environmental impacts go. And a lot of that's connected to food system work. So I'm not sure, but I would throw out a resource for everyone here. It's another national resource. It's called EJ Screen. It's an EPA resource, and you can actually go on there and you can type in your zip code or a business or your community and actually go in and see all of the Superfund sites. You can see all of the different types of just environmental injustices happening in your region. And one of the I think it's socioeconomic factors they have keyed in there is around food security. So you can see if you're living in a place that is experiencing or has experienced food apartheid. Another word that's important there, we don't want to say food insecurity or food desert. Food apartheid we use because it's intentional. And then
Okay,
Mark,
one other thought on that. Public libraries. So I worked in a library for 26 years. So if you're needing data, one more question in Q&A, if I'm going to try to get to, is I'd like to hear thoughts on how to address morality when talking to those who may not be open to the data, and focus more on language of proportionality rather than equality and equity. We have found that we've done this with groups where they're pretty diverse, and the exercise is so well designed that it will take people to a conclusion. So I've got, frankly, less pushback than I expected to. So we do try to keep it out of politics and not have any political discussions. Some people will bring it up, and that's their choice, but we don't bring up any politics in the discussion.
I will say, though, and this is maybe, again, a personal experience, but, I've, in my personal life, know a lot of those kinds of folks that our guest here is referencing. And I try to talk about this what really is useful about the simulation is it's hard to argue against historical policy. So, if people go back and they look at the GI Bill, they look at the war on drugs, it's not about my perspective. It's not about it's not a subjective conversation anymore. It's really looking at this is what our federal government did. And so, it really makes it harder for folks to argue. I also think that just the arguments sometimes aren't helpful. So if you feel like you've got a participant in the group who's maybe pushing back a lot, it's okay to just say that maybe we take this conversation offline or we can talk about it another time. But it is few and far between, I'd say. Yeah, and thank you all so much.
All right. Well, thank you so much to Alex and Mark. It looks like we are at the end of our session, but thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Next up, we have our main stage session, which is using research to create hunger-free communities. So in just a moment, a window is going to pop up with a prompt for you to join that next session. Just click the join button to enter. So that's going to conclude our session. We want to thank you so much for joining us. Hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
And Alex and Mark, you're welcome to log off. I'm making up for a little time delay that we have, and then I'll stop the broadcast. But thank you so much for sharing today.
Thanks, Jenna.